Hey guys, welcome back. We are going to be looking at why this lens is awesome. Reason number one, this lens fixes a gap in the market. Now, what do I mean by that? So you've obviously got the 100mm L series f2.8 macro that Canon do for the EF old DSLR cameras, and you've also got the newly released RF version of that lens for the RF mount mirrorless cameras that Canon do. Now that lens is quite dear, but you've got to remember that it is a very sharp prime lens and it's for a new system, so a lot of their glass is expensive at the moment. This is where this lens right here comes in. So instead of being 100mm, it's 85mm, so straight away it will appeal to a lot of portrait photographers who love that classic 85mm look about it. Now, the way that it fixes a gap in the market is because Canon have got 100mm macro lenses, Laowa do 90mm and 100mm. This is a little bit less tight, so it's ideal if you're doing indoor work, portraiture or still life macro. And what this lens effectively does is it gives you the 85mm on full frame cameras, it gives you image stabilization, it gives you a handy macro mode. It's not 2x macro, so it's not true to life macro, it's 1.4x, but there's a ton of handy features on it, especially if you go into scene selection on your Canon mirrorless camera and you click on macro mode. As I've been doing recently, I found out that you don't have to shoot full manual if you don't want to. You can let the macro mode do all the hard work for you, so it will automatically decide if it's too dark, it will increase the ISO, it will do everything. Even if you've got good light and your subject has lots of detail, as a lot of subjects do in macro, it will bump that aperture up, you know, f7, f8, whatever it needs to capture a lot of the detail and keep the sharpness as well. I haven't tried focus stacking yet with this lens, but that is something I will try in the future as I develop my macro skills. I've not been doing it very long, it's a very new thing that I've discovered, but the reason this lens fixes a gap in the market is because you're getting the 85mm full frame lens with image stabilization. I mean, Canon's EF85 1.8 that's very popular and portraiters love for the old DSLR cameras, you know, that doesn't have image stabilization, it certainly doesn't have macro mode, but that's a great lens, and this effectively this lens is replacing that lens, to be honest. And for what you get with this lens, it ticks a lot of boxes for people that don't want to pay a premium price for the L series 100mm 2.8, as that is almost triple the amount of money here in the UK, which brings me on to my next point. Number two, its price. So I got this lens for around £650 here in the UK, which equates to about $780 in the US. So you'd still get change from $1,000. You'd get a lot of change from $1,000 actually. It's not a light lens. I wouldn't say it's light. I've also used the Fuji system, and I absolutely loved the XF56mm 1.2, and it's almost got that literally same sort of feel about it, the same weight anyway. So the price point is a very good one because it's a full frame lens, its maximum aperture is f2, and you got to remember, you know, if you're shooting portraiture and you don't necessarily need a 1.4, then 1.8 and f2, that's right on the ballpark figure, especially if you're not looking for a camera that does maybe 45 megapixels like the R5 and you're not really pixel peeping too much, then you don't need to obviously get something that's like a 1.4 or a 1.2 just yet, especially if you're looking to keep the cost down, you know, away from the L series lineup. So great price point. Obviously that's the reason why this lens is in the enthusiast market that Canon serves. My final point, number 3, is its image quality. Now, like any lens, you want the image quality to be good. Now, I've only had this lens probably only a month, you know, probably just a whole month I've had this lens. So I've only been using this lens a whole month, and I pretty much would say so far it's probably my favourite lens I've ever shot with, and that is a huge statement. My favourite lens before that was the Fujifilm 56 1.2, which, you know, creates lovely dreamlike effects in the bokeh. However, I did find its autofocus to be sluggish. I was using an X-T2 at the time, so obviously not one of the latest Fujifilm cameras, but I can say that the autofocus is fast on this lens. Sometimes there is a little bit of focus breathing or actually failure to focus, but I've not found that in portraiture work. I've more found that focusing to affinity, a bit like the macro work so far. So I have found that focusing is a tiny bit of an issue with this lens, not going to lie, but it's faster autofocus from what I've come from, you know, so very impressed with the autofocus, very impressed with the image stabilization, because I pair it with my Canon RP, which doesn't have IBIS, so this is the only lens I have currently that has image stabilization, and it works very well. Yeah, so what's not to like about some of these images? They're all recent images within the last month. I haven't actually edited them as much as I thought I would. So yeah, very, very pleased with this lens, and I think this lens is not only going to replace the old EF85 1.8 well, but I think it's going to become a workhorse of a lens, especially for enthusiasts. You know, pro photographers, maybe they wouldn't pick this, but especially enthusiasts and hobbyists, it's fantastic. Loving it so far, really am loving it. Yeah, I can't really say a bad thing other than sometimes a bit of failing to focus and focus breathing. I use single point autofocus, so if someone's got any tips for helping me get better at using the autofocus with this lens, or if you have this lens yourself, then feel free to comment down below, because I'd like to hear your feedback of what you found with this lens from you personally using it as well. Yeah, so thank you. Hope you enjoyed the short review.